Good morning. Saturday in the octave of Easter. The octave is nearly done. I hope you are all doing well this morning. Today, we're going to talk about a Dubia Cardinal who broke his silence to tell us about this ongoing reform project in the church and how it's evil. You've heard this kind of thing before. It's good when Cardinal Walter Brandmuller breaks his silence. However, I want to start with an interesting story that came across my desk yesterday. I'll start with Mr. Damian Thompson here. I don't know why this is my default. This is a much better way to do it. But he says rumors that Bishop Daniel Libinori, the brave Jesuit who investigated Marco Rupnik and defended those he did bad things to, is to be removed as an auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of Rome. Remember, a couple days ago, I did a video that almost none of you watched, which was weird, proving that nothing was going to happen to Father Rupnik. And here we have proof of that. This has broken just in the last 12 hours or so. That Francis is now cleaning house of those who stood in his way. Let's get some more details, though. It's just a few more details from Michael Haynes at, again, reporting to us from LifeSite. Mason Latino reports I have that article. It doesn't say much more than this. He says rumors that Pope Francis is set to remove 70-year-old Cardinal de Donatus, who is the vicar of Rome. And if you don't know what the vicar of Rome is, the vicar of Rome is a cardinal who essentially governs the Archdiocese of Rome for the Pope, because the Pope is a little busy. Yes, the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, but the Pope's a little busy running Universal Church, so the vicar of Rome runs it for him. Basically, obviously, any sitting pope can intervene at any time that he wishes in the affairs of Rome, if he so wishes, as he is the actual ordinary. But the Cardinal Vicar of Rome is the functioning bishop of the diocese. And apparently, he has had an increasing difficult relationship with Francis. Now, I'm going to point out something. Cardinal de Donatus is 70. That is the normal retirement age for a priest. And for bishops, I think 75 is the retirement age for cardinals. They have to submit their letter of resignation upon hitting 75. Actually, no, 75 is that for bishops too, and they have to, at the age of 75, submit their resignation to the Vatican. And the sitting pope is at his whim, accepted or not. Cardinal Supich turned 75 on the Feast of St. Joseph this year in Chicago. He's probably going to be there till he's 80, probably. But Cardinal Donatus is 70, so he's well under the retirement age and has no reported health problems. But he's had a strained relationship with Francis. He's also set to remove Bishop Libinori as one of Rome's auxiliaries. So this is one of the assistants to Cardinal de Donatus, perhaps in the Curia, and because he is opposed to Rupnik. You see, Rupnik may have been laicized, but Francis gave him back his faculties as a priest. May have been excommunicated. Francis lifted that. He was incarnated, meaning got his faculties technically from the diocese, his home diocese in Slovenia, but he's still hanging around Rome. And the bishop here is one who decided that, to do the obvious thing, which is to stand with the nuns. Yes, nuns that Rupnik, caused great deal of harm to, and opposed Rupnik because he has some kind of functioning moral compass. I have literally no idea where on anything else these two stand on anything. But Francis is removing them. One, he's not like forcing them into retirement. That'd be too obvious. The Mason Latino article makes it clear that one of them is going to go get a meaningless job in the Roman Curia. That is one way to take care of a problem, is to promote somebody to a place where they can't do anything, some symbolic job, and the other is essentially going to probably be retired, because that's one easy way of handling these problems. And so, again, I showed you a couple days ago. If you haven't watched that video, maybe you should go back and watch it. Nothing is going to happen to Marco Rupnik. Absolutely nothing. They have said they're going to launch an investigation. They could just let that go on and on and on until everybody's forgotten about Rupnik, or until Francis' successor comes in. And if he is a man cut from the same cloth as Francis, if he's another Jesuit, he'll probably just close the door on all that and walk away. Well, and, in all the discussions on of who the next pope will be for, Francis II, nobody has really looked at the high-profile Jesuits and seen where, what the ranking is on the scale of things. And the reason I bring that up is because if Francis is willing to do that, to do just what I showed you, if he's willing to keep Marco Rupnik around, pat him on the back, job well done, and if there's a whole host of Jesuit or Jesuit adjacent priests in running these various Marian shrines and Padre Pio's shrine and all these other important places in the church that are filled with Rupnik's art and say, it'd be too expensive to remove it. The laity here don't seem to mind it, yada, yada, yada. So if they have all that, what is to say that he won't take measures behind the scenes to make sure that the conclave goes the way he wants it to? If he's willing to do that with a man like Rupnik, he's probably willing to take extraordinary steps to make sure that the next conclave goes exactly the way he wants it to go. I also want to bring you this story. It's not a Catholic story, but this should. For those of you in America, this won't surprise any of you. This is a canary in the coal mine for Christianity broadly. So this comes from the Christian Post with the headline, Southern Baptist Convention loses over 1,200 churches in 2022. Data shows. Over 1,200 member churches in 2022. That's a lot. Of the 50,423 active congregations they had in 2021, in 2022, 2% of them were shuttered. Another 1/2% either left or were disaffiliated by the convention by the time data for 2022 was compiled. This is, of course, a lot of the problem that Protestantism has in general is that it is schism upon schism upon schism upon schism upon schism. And then, of course, with that usually comes growing heresy and the rest. But I want to really kind of show you, there was a number here that, here, so we'll quote this. This is, again, canary in the coal mine, Christianity broader in North America. And they're much more honest with their numbers than the Catholic Church is. The Catholic Church will tell you with a straight face that there are 1.2 billion Catholics in the world. And talk about all this growth in places. What they never talk about is how in South America and in Africa and other places, you have Presbyterians, Pentecostals, and other sort of more charismatic forms of Protestantism making gigantic inroads in those places, Catholics leaving the faith and joining them. But those Catholics who left the faith are still considered on the rolls of their parishes, and so are still on the rolls as Catholics in Rome. And part of that has to do with once a Catholic, always a Catholic kind of thing. But there's a difference between the 1.2 billion number of Catholics and then those who are practicing. And I'd like to know what that number is, that practicing number. We will never get that number from Rome, maybe because they don't know how to calculate it. I suspect they have the resources to do it. They just don't ever want to do it because it would be eye-opening if they did. But they say in May of 2023, Lifeway, the research division of the Southern Baptist Convention, released a report finding that SBC experienced a decline of approximately 457,000 people in 2022. According to the report, in 2023, it went from 13.68 million members in 2021 to 13.2 million members in 2022. 457,000 people left the Southern Baptist Church in 1 year. 1 year. This is not to dunk on the Protestants. This is, I hope that those 457,000 people who left, most of them became Catholic. I don't think that happened because if 457,000 people had entered the Catholic Church in 1 year in the United States, we would know that number would have been trumpeted by the USCCB. How many of them just left Christianity? It's a canary in the coal mine where the way things are. Sonny Jim does not understand why Francis would want to protect somebody like Rupnik. It takes more energy. He gets more flack. Hurts the reputation of the church. They understand that we have a short attention span and this is going to go away eventually. And then it'll only be weird people like myself and a few others who 5 years from now will be like, by the way, you remember Rupnik? Here's his latest piece of art going up in some shrine. People will be like, who was that? And then I'll have to explain to them who it was. But most people forget about it. We'll forget about this. Marine says identifying as a Catholic and actually being one are not necessarily the same thing. That's very true. And Sonny Jin says lots of people are angry with their church and how it bowed down to the secular authorities over the 2020 problem. That's also true. A lot of that has to do with it. A lot of it also just has to do with the greater attrition we've seen, because for whatever reason, a lot of Christian groups are just wanting to go along to get along when we're all supposed to be preaching the gospel. And this is putting us in the question of heresies and schisms and false gospels and all the rest of the stuff, myriad differences we have. The core, every Christian, virtually everybody who calls himself a Christian agrees we're supposed to spread the gospel. And a lot of people just stopped doing that. And most of them would agree that part of spreading the gospel is witnessing to the truth in a time of universal deceit. And again, people have surrendered on that. All right, so let's go to the main event. A relatively short thing from Cardinal Walter Brandmuller. If you don't remember Cardinal Brandmuller, he is a retired one of the cardinals who he was one of the co-signers of the Dubia back in 2016. Okay. He occasionally, once or twice a year, will issue a letter. Since he is long retired, the man is well into his 80s at this point. He will once or twice a year issue a letter on something going on in the church. Being European, I think he's German. He's been watching the German synodal way, and it has been reported that there's sort of a détente between the German bishops and Rome on the issue of the synodal way. The German synodal way and the larger synod of synodality basically are working for the same thing, except the synod on synodality, the thing the whole church around the world is supposed to be engaged in, is working on processes to then make all these more overt things happen, really, deaconettes and laity running parishes and all that nonsense. Well, the German synod is actually just cutting to the chase and going directly to that solution. And the message from Rome all the way back to 2019 has been to the Germans, don't do this, go with the universal church. Not just don't do this, it's don't do this alone, go with the universal church. And so they've basically finally, after 5 or 6 years, come to an agreement that the German synodal way will just wait for the universal church. I wonder what it was Francis told them when it came to deaconettes and all sorts of things. A major peace branch, an olive branch given to the German bishops, was the James Martin blessings, the fiducia supplicans. It was a major one because they wanted that. They actually wanted more than that, but their reaction to that document was basically, good. This is a great step forward, a great sign that Rome is seeing things the way we are. So here's Cardinal Walter Brandmuller's response to all of this. Let's make sure we got this on the screen properly. We do. Very good. So he says, quote, as was to be expected, the synodal way has long since become lost in the pathless. The defiant attempts of professional Catholic officials to close their eyes to the reality will, like their synodal path, end in frustration. What remains is the careless waste of millions on church tax money, and what is much worse, discord on central questions of faith and morals, even within the episcopate, and thus serious damage to the unity with the entire church. There's already talk of heresy and schism. Let's pause. If you don't know what the church tax is, in Germany, you have to register with the government there for whatever your religious affiliation is, and then the government there taxes you your tithe and then gives it to the church directly. There's no... in the U.S., Catholics are notorious for like tithing 1 or 2% at church, and then in theory, we give our tithe to other things that we think represents the faith, is some other way of giving to the church. That doesn't happen in Germany. The government just comes down and hits you with like 5 or 10%. I don't remember what the number is, but it's huge. Okay, and then they give it to the church directly. You might understand why that causes some problems. And to get out of paying the church tax, you have to renounce your faith in writing to the state. I don't know how the SSPX and things operates there or whatnot, but that's what the church tax is. Let's continue. Added to this is the mass apostasy of the Catholics who have been baptized. Around 5% still take part in the religious sacramental life of the church. 5% in Germany, folks. The seminaries are, if not closed at all, only sparsely staffed. But it must also be underlined, the places of formation of some communities, Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, Community of St. Martin, Holy Cross, which are characterized by their love for the liturgy and the church, are enjoying a lively, growing life. They are at an active service of true renewal and truth. Despite everything, the church lives in those places where faithful, zealous priests work. And yet the church bureaucracy, often consisting of more than 1,000 employees, functions in the diocese administration, quite a few of whom have long since stopped taking part in church services and sacraments. And the money still sounds in the box regardless of the millions of people leaving the church. So in other words, you have churches, you now have parishes where in Germany, where there are people who work at the parishes who stopped going to mass themselves, yet they still work in the parish. Think about that for a second. And the money still flows into these churches, even though only 5% go to mass on a regular basis. Again, think about that for a second. Brian Mueller asked the obvious question, quote, "The only question is how much longer? How long will the self-sufficient apparatus continue to rattle, along silently ignoring the Lord's command, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel?" However, the state of the church brings with it dramatic loss of importance. In the decades after the Second World War, Catholic social teaching was the basis for reconstruction and development of the Federal Republic of Germany under Konrad Adenauer, in harmony with the important European de Gaulle and de Gasperi, who were joined by Ludwig Erhard as the father of the German economic miracle. For some time now, their Christian social ideal has no longer played a role. I mean, you're not sure what that is. For those who don't know, I got my PhD in public policy. I studied the green issue, the Laudato Si topic, what Laudato Si tries to focus on, the secular side of things. And my doctoral dissertation was on Catholic social teaching and Laudato Si. It's why I talk about the Pachamama thing all the time and Laudato Si all the time, and the relationship between the secular world and the Catholic Church all the time, because here you get a good example of this. The European project, as they call it, a lot of it was led by Catholics in the 50s and 60s. The EU, well, the early proponents of it, claimed they were inspired by Catholic social teaching. I don't see how, because I've studied Catholic social teaching extensively, more than the typical person, and I don't see how they got there. But it's undeniable that there were Catholics who were holding like 60s era Catholic and social teaching papal writings in their hands, basically, while crafting the European project. And they, in some ways, they had some good results. I mean, obviously, the as they call it, the German economic miracle is example number one of that. The revitalization of Germany, of West Germany, in those days, is a great example of that, and how starkly it stood against East Germany, and the example there of the hammer and sickle in action. Let's continue, though. Rather, with the success of the German economic miracle, the increasingly dense cloud cover of the materialistic zeitgeist began to block the view of the sky. Waves of food, housing, and sins of the flesh flooded the country. The result was, and still is today, a post-Christian atheistic society in which Christianity, the church, only has a niche existence, ignored, despised, fought against. That description fits the United States today. That description is, at least in much of America, maybe not in my part of the country so much, but still in growing parts of America, that is a description for all of us, not just the state of the church in Germany. We just have 4 times the higher rate of Catholics who go to mass on a regular basis. We're at a whopping 20%. Woo! Let's keep going. And now the question arises as to how the church and how Catholics should respond to the situation, which did not arise through no fault of its own. A sober assessment quickly reveals that anxious, desperate attempts to revive the former partnership between state, society, and church have long since become hopeless, even though folk church elements may still have been preserved in Bavaria, as here and there. In most areas of Germany, however, the church has had to swap its former place on the official gallery with the dock. The most recent legislation has also set standards in the area of matrimony, family, and health policy that make a mockery of Christian moral and social teachings, and indeed of anthropology that has developed since classical antiquity. Hardly any evil idea conceivable in the arc of tension from artificial ways of bringing life into the world to essentially just the Moloch ritual, but for older people, and the Moloch ritual, except for a person by themselves, is excluded. An almost apocalyptic contrast to the dignity of man as God's image and crown of creation. And now the Christian, the Catholic, has to find and create oases in this human cultural desert in which he can still breathe freely and survive. Let's pause here. Nothing he's saying here is exclusive to Germany. This is the United States. This is Canada. This is Europe. These errors are like the nouveau errors. These are the becoming mainstream, if they're not already, in our own countries. This isn't just Germany. That's why I'm bringing this to you. This will have to happen in different ways and to different degrees depending on country and people, but is an increasingly current model for church survival in a hostile environment. The increasingly number of and the destruction of parishes and desecrations in and of churches show that this is becoming more and more aggressive. So now, depending on the given circumstances, the transition from the national church to the community church must be initiated as far as possible without painful disruption. This is a call to decentralize the churches. This is essentially an anti-national bishops conference statement. The churches in the United States are much more centralized, and the modern church in the post-conciliar world is far more centralized than it would have been a century prior to the council. The idea of a U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, that went by a different name when it was founded in the 60s. This is a new thing. This is not how the church had been run. The bishops would sometimes meet with one another to put out joint statements for the whole country, but they didn't have a bishops' conference. The bishop was essentially the pope of his diocese, only answerable to the pope, basically. It's putting aside suffragan dioceses and things like that. Anyway, the young Joseph Ratzinger had already spoken about this. Of course, friction and conflicts are almost unavoidable, especially in rural areas, but time will also heal such wounds. Depending on the local circumstances, it'll be essential to prepare the community for such an inevitable development in order to prevent disappointment and even protest. Hand in hand with this should also be a more decisive emphasis on the self-image of priests. In the old rite of ordination, pre-conciliar rite, pre-Vatican II rite, the duties of the priest were listed. He was ordained to offer the holy sacrifice, to bless, to lead the congregation, to preach, and to baptize. Significantly, there is no mention of parish administration, committees, or asset management and management of social institutions or other quote-unquote works. Let's pause here again. How many of you have ever noticed that a lot of in the modern day, diocesan priests often have to do a lot of that kind of work that even before Vatican II wasn't that they'd manage their parishes and have to manage budgets and things, but things have become professionalized. And in the nonprofit world, back when I was, working in grad school on this stuff, there was a big pushback on this when people had noticed in all of nonprofits that they were essentially becoming more business-like, taking their cues from business. And this is what we're seeing here. That's what he's talking about. So, asset management. I mean, that's not a word that you would ever associate with running a parish. Okay. Anyway, admittedly, this catalog of duties dates back to the Middle Ages, but it contains precisely the work to which the priest is ordained today, as always. It will therefore be easy to distinguish between which areas of activity can still and in the future only be undertaken by the priest and which can also be undertaken by lay people, parishioners, or church employees. In any case, the priest's preferred place is not so much the parish office. His job is not so much administration, account management, etc., also running kindergarten and the like. Incidentally, the committee and meeting Catholicism, again, committee and meeting Catholicism, that's another term we've heard before. I've brought to you a letter from another priest, from another bishop, might have been Mueller in the last few weeks, denouncing committee Catholicism. Okay. That has flourished since Vatican II has already become a discontinued model, and hardly anyone, apart from the officials of the Central Committee, will shed a tear after it. This distinction, which reserves the priest only the prece, the presiding, and the leadership of the congregation, should be made in order to enable the priest the freedom to fulfill his actual mission: proclamation, liturgy, administration of the sacraments, and pastoral care, the job of a priest. This is really the hour of the lay people. Like priests, they also follow their own calling. Their area of responsibility is not the pulpit and the altar, but, as Vatican II emphasizes, the world in which the church has to fulfill its mission. With this division of labor, assuming wise selection of employees and mutual trust, the priest could also gain the time that is necessary for conscientious preparation for sermons, catechesis, pastoral discussions, etc., for the priest's own spiritual life. Let's pause here. There's also another option, and that would be address the root cause of the vocations crisis and deprofessionalize the running of a parish and put the parish administration back to the model it was before the council. Yes, there are laws in various places have changed, so you will still have to have some professional knowledge for priests. Fine, but you can deprofessionalize much of this and put it back in the hands of priests, those in the transitional diaconate and senior seminarians, and bring back the minor orders. And you could have essentially ordained running your parishes again and getting the laity back to their proper place in the church. But instead, the vocations crisis is caused by this part, at least in great part, by this elevation of the laity outside the historic role the laity had in the church. That is the alternative to this. Anyway, let's continue. The believers must also understand this. How many ways they can and should contribute to the life of their community then depends on specific circumstances. Of course, it should be clear to priests and lay people alike that the church must never serve as a stage for, quote, self-promoters. Likewise, experience teaches that lay people and priests should never exceed the limits of their competence. Absolutely. The latter should resist the temptation to make a name for themselves as builders, asset managers in the other worldly areas, while the laity should not consider the pulpit and altar as their workplace. In other words, you hear all this, laity should be preaching the gospel, or the religious should be, I've gotten emails from priests telling me that at this mission, please keep me anonymous, but this mission near where I'm at has these sisters at blank convent of blank religious order. They don't have enough priests, so they give each other they give each other Holy Communion and preach the gospel, and in every way it's like mass. And then a priest comes once a month, right? They're overstepping their bounds. You got to take care of the vocations crisis. And what you got to take care of the vocations crisis is re-embrace Orthodox Catholicism. That's what you got to do. That's how you take care of it. As the example of all the traditional priestly fraternities he lists at the beginning, plus the SSPX will show you, they're not having nearly the vocations problems that the rest of the church is. They're not having the vocations necessary to replace the regular, the diocesan priests. People make it sound like they are having those great of vocations, but they're having vocations in ways that any diocese today would be jealous of. Anyway, he says, in order for this division of labor to be successful and for the communities to live together harmoniously and for one another, human Christian maturity is required on both sides. The problem is not new. The Apostle Paul already experienced this. For example, he wrote to the community in Philippi, I admonish Evodia and I admonish Syntyche to be with one mind in the Lord. The admonition should also be used today in some parish or diocesan councils could be heard. The more godless zeitgeist blows in the church face, the more necessary close solidarity between believers and priests become. Perhaps then, as they once did, heathens of today will also say with regard to Christians, look how they love each other. And this experience could have its missionary impact again today. In fact, lively communities like islands in the sea could offer a safe haven to people who are disoriented and floating on the waves of the zeitgeist. That is Cardinal Walter Brandmuller denouncing not only the synodal way in Germany, synod on synodality, and the confusion being wrought by it. That's the point of that. And his point is basically, know your place in the church and do the best you can be, the best Catholic you can be, and know your place in the church instead of trying to subsume roles that aren't yours. All right, folks, let me take a look here in the live chat if there's anything else. Yeah, Jim is the guy. He is the person organizing that Give, Send, Go. For a couple days, Wednesday I think was the day it started. Thursday. Jim, let me know what day it was, Wednesday or Thursday. But after the thing I mentioned on Easter, and my personal update that it was a great blessing, but also came with some challenges. Put the link to the live chat there. He's reminding us that we have we're almost halfway. So thank you, Jim, and it's appreciated. D says you've got too many chiefs and too many lip service others. Or are all the God-fearing warriors, when they do what they do to the web, they do to all. You've been betrayed for power, and the love of money equals evil. I mean, the church today is afflicted by those who really are concerned that much by their relationship with Caesar and the esteem of the world. The problem is the world doesn't love the church. It doesn't. All this things we've done, that the Vatican has done in the last 60 years to get the respect of the world, the surrender on certain issues, the lukewarm resistance to others, while maintaining close relationships with Caesar, has only done one thing. It's led to one thing and one thing only, and that is people leaving. Because what comes from that relationship is also affects the preaching you get on Sunday, how the mass is offered. It affects everything in the life of the church. And so people eventually go to, some rock and roll gospel Protestant place somewhere where they get maybe a little closer to the gospel preached in a more close to the text kind of way, but still they get a false gospel because it comes with the so-called solas, the 5 solas and all the other falsities that come with it. It costs souls as a consequence. But it'll come to an end. I'm confident it'll come to an end fairly soon. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. Is there's anything else you want to bring into this, bring up now in the live chat? This is your time to do so. If not, make sure to hit like. And as always, I ask you to pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.